Greetings, and welcome to an awkwardly self-aware episode of Genre Grinder. I'm your host, Gabe, and I live inside your streaming device, where I can react to any question you may have regarding this podcast. Go ahead and ask. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. I don't know the answer to that one. Joining me today is my friend and returning guest, Jim Laczkowski. How have you been, Jim?
I've been good. Hey, you out there listening to this podcast, you in the audience, why are you listening to this podcast right now? In fact, if you keep listening, maybe your ears will fall off. You never know. Or maybe one of us will come over and just talk to you about movies.
I'm behind you right now. Put that piece of cake down. You've had enough. So this week, or last month, it was metal horror movies. And this month, we're removing the L and covering meta horror movies.
So
And
are you going to do Met?
I was going to say, next month, we're removing the A. We're going to cover Met horror movies, which are all horror movies that take place in the New York metropolitan area.
Wow.
We're not going to do that. That's not a real thing.
Oh, okay.
We're not going to go into the whole Webster's dictionary defines meta as, but I'm going to do my version of it. And a meta horror movie, and I feel like we used to call these postmodern horror movies, but metafiction became really popular with the young people in the past 15 years. So now we use meta, as in metatextual. And a meta story, or in this case, a meta movie, is something that is aware of its own medium, its own genre, its own tropes, cliches, etc. But this is kind of a vibe-based genre signifier. So it could kind of mean something different to everyone. So I've picked a couple movies that represent a couple different brands of what we might call meta horror. And then I also want to preface this by saying, admitting that I picked the movies again. These were pretty much my decision, and so don't blame Jim. He had some ideas, and a lot of them I picked some bad movies here. I'm not gonna front, but there are very good examples of meta horror movies that some people like. If you've not seen a meta horror movie, I would suggest Scream is an obvious one.
Of course.
Videodrome is my favorite David Cronenberg movie. It's a really fun meta slasher movie called Behind the Mask: The Rise of Leslie Vernon. And then there are some other ones that we've already covered in some point or another on the podcast, so I didn't really want to go into them. And that includes Man Bites Dog, which was on the Scariest Moments thing I did with Patrick, Rubber, Cabin Fever, Detention, Tucker and Dale versus Evil, Barbarian Sound Studios, and Tragedy Girls. Those were all when I did the best horror movies of the 2010s. And
now you said Cabin Fevered, but did you mean Cabin in the Woods?
I meant Cabin in the Woods. Cabin Fever is not particularly self-aware. It's somewhat self-aware. You're right. I meant Cabin in the Woods. Yeah. I would say that Cabin Fever is like on the cusp.
Sure.
And then another one we already covered, which is really early, would be Peeping Tom. Has a sort of meta narrative, and Patrick and I covered that one on the horror movies in 1960. So
great episode.
Thank you.
I was thinking of like examples of where this happens outside of the horror genre, and of course the main one that came to my mind was, and I just remember my friend Dan at the time, because we both had very different opinions of the movie Magnolia by Paul Thomas Anderson. And God, he just railed against this scene where where Philip Seymour Hoffman is on the phone and he's talking to somebody on the other line saying, okay, this is the scene in the movie where you help me out. Mm-hmm. And he was like, what? Why would he all of a sudden why is this turning into a meta movie moment? Like it's all of a sudden turning into Scream. And I was like, I don't know, but I love that choice. I don't care. I just think like he's being sincere. He's being real in that moment. And his frame of reference is a movie. It doesn't mean like suddenly he's aware that he's inside the movie or anything, but there are moments like that in other movies where
there's other moments. I think all of Magnolia has a lot of that. There are people speaking to the camera, and the narration really I mean, it's hard to say narration doesn't make something meta, but there is something about when characters are narrating their own stories.
Sure.
any sort of Lovecraftian version, which takes us back to horror, I guess. So any sort of film noir or detective fiction where they're narrating their own story that has a very slight meta edge to it.
Yeah, I can see that.
The
Blast of
really
Strahd.
obvious one is spoof movies. Airplane, Scary Movie. Those are all movies that know their movies and talk directly to the audience and reference other movies.
Yeah, and
That
Kevin Smith certainly did that
Kevin
in
Smith does it all the
yeah,
time. And
winked
it's
at the
usually
camera.
really obnoxious when it comes to comedy, for me at least. I
Yeah.
think those are some of Kevin Smith's worst movies, and I don't really like spoof movies for the most part.
I don't even like I'm one of the few, especially coming from, my generation, my age, I didn't really like Ferris Bueller, him talking
No,
to the camera. I just
no.
found that annoying.
I think I just find that character annoying.
Oh well, yeah, that too. I mean,
I think I just don't like that movie.
yeah, it just felt like one of those movies that I should like, and I just don't. The only scene I really like is when Charlie Sheen shows up in the police station. Like to me,
Yeah.
that's funny, but most of it I find annoying.
Well, oh, that just reminded me the Ferris Bueller thing made me think the Deadpool movies are super meta.
Oh God, yeah, this is
And
gonna get to me.
the
Yeah, this is like an interesting discussion because it's like what happens when genre filmmakers try to do their own, like Eight and a Half, or
Mhm,
Woody Allen did Deconstructing Harry, which should have just been called Deconstructing Woody because it's really just
mhm.
about him analyzing the way he tells stories and how it affects other people and all that stuff. But these titles are really interesting, even if they're very messy. and
Yeah, and so like the first grouping here is actually that's a good segue because that's our first grouping of movies here is movies where filmmakers are talking about their own work,
Mhm.
which yeah, horror guys like to do. And I think I know some of the reasons behind that, but the way I've written my notes out, I'm going to kind of unveil these in a row here. So we're going to start like we always do on Genre Grinder with the oldest movie we covered.
And the first two are definitely going to be mostly driven by Gabe because I mean, obviously I know Lucio Fulci way more thanks to our Directors Club episode we did on that filmmaker, but this other one I am not very familiar with,
Yeah.
despite having heard of the character Coffin Joe. I haven't explored this director's filmography.
Yeah,
So,
so I'll start things off with the Hallucinations in a Deranged Mind from 1978, directed, written, starring Mojica Marins. Watching this particular movie is what inspired me to pull the trigger here
mm,
and ask you to do this because I was reviewing this Arrow Video huge Inside the Mind of Coffin Joe Blu-ray that just came out, and I had seen Marins's at Midnight I'll Take Your Soul and This Night I'll Possess Your Corpse and The Awakening of the Beast. Those three movies kind of got rotation. They got a decent DVD release. They were on do you remember? I don't remember what it was called. I think it was IFC. There was a show that Rob Zombie hosted.
huh.
I can't remember what it was called, but it was like IFC Midnight or something like that. And they would play like was it on AMC or TM? It was on TCM. I'm screwing this up. It was on Turner Classic Movies. Anyway, so I had seen these a couple times, and I had also read Pete Toombs wrote a book called Mondo Macabro that really went into the scale and scope of Marins's fame. And so I was always interested in these, and I always knew about them. And also speaking of Rob Zombie, Awakening of the Beast. There's a whole bunch of samples on the album Astrocrete 2000 White Zombie
Wow.
album. There's a whole
Why
bunch of
am I not
samples.
surprised? And Patrick should probably be here.
The character that he plays, Coffin Joe or Zaidu Kashau. I'm probably fucking that up, but I know it's Kashau. He started as just a character in the first two movies, but he sort of turned into a Svengoolie type,
Hmm,
as in the TV personality Svengoolie.
sure.
And because there wasn't really horror movies in Brazil before this, because it was a sort of military dictatorship at the time, people really connected to this. And so it had a little bit of that Alfred Hitchcock, people would see him on the street, that kind of situation, like he
Yeah.
just became Coffin Joe. And so it's a very, very long story that I'm trying to short here. He had done a series of unsuccessful dramas and westerns, and he eventually built this sort of little community of actors. And when he made At Midnight I'll Take Your Soul and it was a hit, then that just sort of became like his way of being able to experiment and do wild, wacky things. And just there's such an original voice to it all. His way of taking these things that we culturally recognize and just sort of feeding it through his version of it and what he got is just super interesting, even when it's not great. And so what I didn't understand until I reviewed this Blu-ray set, because I'd only seen those 3 movies, is that the meta commentary here had almost always been with it. In his third movie, The Strange World of Coffin Joe is sort of the crypt keeper. He hosts it, but then Marins also plays a psychotic psychology professor
God, that
within the
happens a
movie.
lot in these movies where
Yes,
psychology professors or
that's what brought me here.
psychologists.
So yeah, you've mentioned it now the listeners keep that in their mind. Psychotic professor, psychology professor. And he hosted a different director, Marcelo Mota, did The Strange Hostel of Naked Pleasures, where he again appears as Coffin Joe. And apparently he had some sort of TV series that was really like Svengoolie, where he hosted horror movies. And then Awakening of the Beast, which is if you've never seen a Coffin Joe movie or a José Mojica Marins movie, Awakening of the Beast I think is his best and most emblematic movie. It's his 4th horror movie, so it's like maybe you should watch the other ones first to get an idea of what he is. But it's such a wild, weird movie. It's surrealistic. It's sort of a horror movie. But it's the first movie to explore the idea that Jose Mojica Marins is a character and that he is in a Jose Mojica Marins movie. So in that film, it's a much shorter thing, but he plays himself on some kind of panel show that's being shown within the film. And I'm not clear if this was a real thing that was like on television or if this was shot for the movie, but it's a bunch of psychiatrists and filmmakers discussing the psychological effects of depravity on film. And there's this loose narrative in the movie where a doctor gives volunteers LSD and then makes them stare at a poster for one of his The Strange World of Coffin Joe, and then all this hallucination shit happens. And the twist at the end is the LSD was a placebo, and that's just the power of a Coffin Joe movie.
Oh, nice.
Not even the movie, just a poster. Just the cultural awareness of Coffin Joe means you go mad just looking at a poster for one of his movies.
Oh, that sounds like a trip. No pun intended.
Yeah.
I might be into that.
But yeah, Waking of the Beast is pretty cool. So, and then there's another one called Exorcism Negro, which I haven't seen, which apparently Marins plays himself trying to deny the existence of Coffin Joe. And so that one sounds a little familiar, that the idea that Coffin Joe is a real entity that exists in the world and that he needs to chase away from reality because he's made it real, which is another thing to kind of keep in the back of your mind, that there was this movie that I haven't seen, so I can't really verify exactly what happens, but there's this movie where Coffin Joe is an actual thing that is sort of haunting Marins. So that brings us to the movie I made Jim watch, which is Hallucinations in a Deranged Mind.
He tied me to a chair and made me watch it.
Yeah, I think that part of the reason I picked this one instead of Awakening of the Beast is that Awakening of the Beast is so much its own thing for so much of its run. And Awakening of the Beast is basically a Alejandro Jodorowsky movie before he was making I'm almost positive Jodorowsky has seen it, because it really has the same, there's so much in it that you then see in Holy Mountain in particular, done more lavishly. But and so I made you watch this one because this one is from a kind of downturn in Marins's career, and from what I understand, he was struggling with funding, and so he kind of made a clip show.
That's what it seemed like to me, like just leftover footage.
It wasn't even left over; it's just footage from his old movies.
Oh, okay.
It's almost like more than half the movie is footage from old movies.
Wow.
With almost zero context. So it's this sort of bizarre purity to it. It's not high-minded like Awakening of the Beast or what Exorcismo Negro sounds like.
Although maybe you should be high watching it.
Yeah, well, I think that it helps.
But
But
it's very hallucinatory. I
yes,
mean, that's the thing is like it's like, gosh, this opening sequence is lasting like 15 minutes or something. I kind of was like, is there going to be a plot, or is this what? I mean, and then eventually I sort of gave in and sort of just went with it. But there there really is hardly anything to this story outside of the patient at the mental clinic who is having these like crippling nightmares.
yeah, it's basically the idea is that there's a psychiatric doctor who was within this community of other doctors. Is I thought he was just a patient. He's apparently supposed to be one of the other doctors.
Right.
That's something
Yeah.
I and he keeps having these hallucinations about the Coffin Joe movies. And in his hallucinations, Coffin Joe is trying to steal his wife, which is a whole thing where Coffin Joe's real thing is about he's basically an objectivist who's like
Yeah.
thinks he is the best, the ultimate human, and he needs to breed to pass on his genes. That's his evil. He is a sadist and a psychopath, but his main thing is he's trying to find the perfect woman. So those early movies are basically him finding weird roundabout ways of torturing women into his capture, and the one that is not afraid is the one he will pass his seed on with. So this guy has this
Ugh.
fear that his wife is going to be that one.
Yeah.
And they
That's
bring in the real Jose Marins to explain that this isn't real to this poor man. Uh, and then they just show that's the context to just say, oh, and by the way, this is what's happening in this man's brain is he's just replaying mind frying images from all these movies. There is a couple things. The very opening is a new bit, I believe, if I'm
mhm.
remembering correctly, but most of it is just flat out footage from the other movies, which end with scenes of Coffin Joe going to hell and experiencing hell. A lot of that footage is recycled in this. And then it's connected by this thing that's sort of like an extra low budget version of the shunting from Society.
Oh yeah. I
Um,
totally see that.
it's just like these drapes of flesh and blobs. I wrote myself a note saying instead of flashbacks, we get fleshbacks. I knew you'd laugh
I
at that.
like that. I
I
like
knew
it.
you'd laugh at that.
Yeah. That's my
That
kind of humor.
that was a Jim joke. I was like, oh, this
Totally.
this one's gonna hit big.
No, I
Um,
thought it's funny. Like I mean, I don't know about aesthetically, but I certainly thought of like Stuart Gordon and
yeah,
Brian Usna at
Brian Usna
times.
in particular.
Yeah.
I could imagine Brian Usna having seen some of these. This one, I don't think so, though. This one was like barely released outside of Brazil, and even then, barely got a like a lot of these movies were sort of lost for a while,
Hmm.
even in their home country, and they sort of made a comeback when the I want to say it was the early or mid '90s. They had a sort of VHS. I think it was Something Weird Video started putting out some of them on VHS, so they got a little bit of and the Pete Toombs book helped with that too. But I mean, it would be unusual for any famous American or Italian filmmaker to have seen this film, and yet, and yet, so I want to do something I never do here. I'm going to stop talking about this movie now, having everybody keep everything in mind here, because this is why I wanted to do this episode, is because this just dawned on me and it was kind of mind blowing.
It
So
all ties together.
yeah, so we're gonna move on to we're gonna kind of talk about two movies here. We're gonna mostly talk about A Cat in the Brain, which is Un Gatto nel Cervello, which is also known as Nightmare Concert. This is Lucio Fulci film from 1990. And we're also going to talk about Wes Craven's New Nightmare. But I didn't prepare a lot of notes on New Nightmare. I mostly want to talk about the weird coincidences that keep lining up with these three movies.
I
So,
can totally see the connections
so
for sure.
if you don't have anything you need to say before we get into this, I'm gonna try to force feed the listener a bunch of more context about Lucio Fulci in this.
Oh, please do. Yeah, because you're the expert.
So this is one, yeah, this is like I'm new to the Coffin Joe stuff, and I did my due diligent research during my review, but that's something I might have some of that wrong, but this is something I do know about. So uh Fulci, like Marins, Fulci, his salad days are in the rear view at this point.
Mm-hmm.
He had a hell of a, he made comedies that were very popular. He made some westerns and gialli that were pretty popular. And then in 1979, he makes Zombie 2, which is the Italian title. We know it as Zombie. And it is a huge hit. And he sort of gets as much as you can get carte blanche in Italian B horror movies in the time. He gets sort of carte blanche to just do wild, gory, surrealistic stuff. You got City of the Living Dead, The Beyond, The House by the Cemetery. By 1982, he's got The New York Ripper, which is an extremely mean-spirited, graphically violent movie that Patrick and I actually recently talked about on the podcast.
And I actually quite like that one.
It's very well made, and it
Yeah.
might be his last well-made movie.
Mm-hmm.
He's still, when we did the whole Directors Club episode, I had to revisit a bunch of the movies that I thought sucked, and I actually started to appreciate a lot more of his straight to video, made for TV. I started to like more of it, but it's so low budget because the Italian film industry mostly collapses, especially genre filmmaking. Basically, if your name's not Dario Argento, you're not making movies with any money anymore. And then on top of this, Fulci's actually very sick. He has diabetes and some
Right.
other complications from that. And he makes all these movies, and they're bad. They're bad movies. I enjoy a lot about them. I think there's still some glimmers of how good he was. This one that happens, Cat in the Brain, is sort of designed as a comeback / celebration of his career. I think he was just on the cusp of getting his sort of second wind in America, thanks to later home video stuff. And it references his giallo and gore films. I should say that I count myself as a fan of these things. And this was a movie that was sort of legendary because it came out in the 90s in Italy. So it was not available here. So I remember like all those 90s zines and early websites and bootlegger magazine things. This movie was being passed back and forth, and so I didn't see it for very many years. And when I finally could see it, I had to sort of pretend it was cool and not ugly and awkward and amusingly narcissistic.
Yeah. Well, that's what I mostly got from the experience of watching it, but at the same time it's like it's still fascinating. Like
Yes.
just the idea of somebody at this age in their life making a movie like this is just kind of remarkable in some ways. But I mean, I often think like, what if a director did actually try to capture their state of mind, like in the throes of illness or dementia or something?
Mm-hmm.
It could very well be something like this where it doesn't. There's not a lot of context for certain moments. There's not a lot of coherence at times.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know why like certain imagery appears the way it does, but yet you're still compelled by it because he's such a good craftsman in terms of coming up with interesting imagery that you have never seen before. I think that's the thing I always go
Right.
back to about all of his movies, really. Is like, I've never seen that kind of gore before.
Well, and he's really good at dream logic.
Yes, yeah.
So it's like, if I'm going to compare him to Marins, is that he is dream logic, Marins does hallucinations.
Mm-hmm.
And the big difference between them, I think, is, other than culturally, is Marins is sort of self-taught outsider artist. Fulci is like a well-educated kind of guy. He's super smart for how violent and base and transgressive his films are. He was a very smart guy. He's probably the smartest of all these Italian guys. Part of his personality was that he was a dickhead to everybody, but it was in part because he was the smartest guy in the room at all times.
And I got that sense, even going back to something like just the relationship between like a psychoanalyst and a killer was really well handled in Lizard in a Woman's Skin. I find
Yes.
that movie so interesting and intelligent. On
Yeah.
top of it being a creepy, deranged, jolly. And I just like I don't know. I suspect that like you do have to be kind of a hardcore Fulci fan to get a lot from Cat in the Brain to just
Yeah.
appreciate it on a deeper level, and sort of get what he's trying to come to terms with. But at the same time, like I don't know, like what is he trying to examine? What does watching horror do to a fragile human mind? I don't know if he gets at anything deep, because by the end it's almost like comical.
Right. And it does become so I want to go into what you just said there about the truth, like grappling with the truth of violent media and stuff.
Yeah.
And then the plot of this one is really quick, that Lucio Fulci, the director and person, is so tortured by his own violent movies that he has been convinced that he may be a murderer himself. And we're not going to spoil the last movie we're going to talk about, but I'll spoil this one because it's not really much, because it tells you pretty early in the film that what's really happening is his psychiatrist is
Yes.
using that to hypnotize him into thinking this and then killing people that the psychiatrist wants to kill, and blaming Fulci basically.
Hmm.
Fulci himself almost certainly doesn't commit any violence. Even the ending, depending on which cut you see, is like an extra layer of joke of
Yeah.
the earlier cuts don't have the final gag, so it does seem like Fulci's murdered somebody, but the longer cut ends with, and now we're in a movie and it's all a joke and ha ha ha. But Rick, so quickly before we talk about that, I just want to say that as a movie, and I think the thing that holds this one back that could have really been a lot better than Hallucinations and A Dangerous Mind is that both of them are TV sitcom clip shows, right?
Yeah, more or less.
The problem here is that Fulci doesn't have access to his own movies. He's scenes
Hmm.
from two of his movies and from some movies he produced for television. It's Sodoma's Ghost and Touch of Death he directed,
Right.
but Murder Secret, Massacre, and Bloody Psycho and Hansel and Gretel he did not. He had a Lucio Fulci Presents TV show thing. So on
Huh.
top of, he didn't really direct them. There's rumors that he actually did co-direct Hansel and Gretel. But on top of that, these are all TV movies. These are really, really cheap. So you're missing all of that viscera and coolness of those really good Fulci Gore movies. Like if
Right.
you could include clips from New York Ripper here, I think the impact would become a lot more. Instead, you're doing Touch of Death, which is already a comedy. So when you see footage of a man killing a woman, it's sort of comedic
Hmm.
instead of shocking and gross.
That's what surprised me, even though I was aware that he started out in comedy.
And Touch of Death is a pretty bad comedy, but it is sort of like a Bluebeard comedy. And that's where there's a scene in Cat of Nine Tails of a man eating a dead woman.
Mm.
And that's where that comes from. But I think that really hurts this movie. So it's celebrating Fulci, but we're not getting to see clips of him at his
The
best.
true the true blue Fulci.
Whereas Hallucinations in the Dangerous Mind, in a Deranged Mind, has all the best clips from all these earlier movies.
Yeah,
So
and it makes you feel like you're trapped in that
yeah.
that frame of mind for so long. Like I also was watching, going, man, I don't know. I do need some warnings sometimes for the spiders and the bugs.
Oh yeah, I forget. Yeah, that's a big thing in Marins's movies. Is like when I say he tortures women in those early movies, a lot of that involves just putting spiders on them, which
Wonderful.
to me doesn't frighten me very much.
Oh, you're so
And
lucky.
but it's like it feels a lot less serious than like movies where women are literally like
Yeah.
well, not literally because it's a movie, but are like skinned alive or raped or something even worse. Like he's putting a bug on you. It's sort of quaint in comparison, which is something that's kind of enjoyable about it to me.
Yeah. I
But
guess
yeah, there's a
I
lot
guess
of
I should
spiders.
lighten up sometimes. Like heck,
But I mean, if it's your phobia, I'm not going to hold that against you.
Yeah, I know, but like there is like moments throughout any movie where I just kind of go, "Oh, come on, you don't need to freak out."
So yeah, I guess if you have spider phobia, there's a lot of spiders and
But
tarantulas.
still really interesting imagery. Like there's like a tunnel made of body parts.
Yes, that's from the second one, if I
Mm.
remember. And then in the context of that movie, that's the only color scene in the movie. It's all black and white, and then he goes to hell, and it
Oh,
becomes
okay.
color. It's sort of like Jigoku. The did you ever see Jigoku from like 1960?
It sounds familiar. I
It's
think I
like
did.
a bunch of juvenile delinquents doing juvenile delinquent things, and then they go to hell and have these horrible visions of hell, and it's
Oh, okay.
super gory
That's
for when
right.
it came out.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's kind of like, it kind of has that vibe to it. But
No,
again,
but it's very kaleidoscopic at times, and I'm kind of like
mhm,
really like ooh, like creeped out and grossed out, but at the same time I find it beautiful. It's like a weird sort of yeah, like push and pull with the imagery sometimes where I'm kind of like, oh, I don't know if I can handle this, but yet at the same time it's so remarkably like artistic. I don't know
right,
how else to put it. It's just I'm kind of amazed by some of the visuals, but at the same time, the movie is just mostly that.
yeah.
It's just
But
you really have to like adjust your expectations and of like what a movie is while watching it. It's mostly a hallucination.
and it's fascinating for me as it's art from someone who hasn't trained to be an artist, who
Mm,
trains themselves and trained with other people. Again, where Fulci knows how to do editing tricks to make reality not make sense,
right.
which
Right.
is something that frightens me a lot more when movies do that kind of thing well. That's much more frightening to me, because that plays with actual memory and consciousness can really be fucked up sometimes. I mean, that's why people have anxiety attacks and stuff. So that to me is more frightening, but it's a different kind of thing. And
Well, the idea
um
of losing your mind, I think, in
yeah, yeah,
general. You know,
right.
he even says, "I feel like I'm going crazy, as if my brain's being eaten by a cat." And I'm like, "Yeah, I understand. I know where you're coming from."
And has that fun. That's one of my favorite things in that movie, is that sort of cat puppet that's literally
Yeah.
eating a brain.
I'm like, "Oh
Not
well,
not
you
super
know,
convincing, but
yeah." I kind of went with that. I mean, it's like, "Hey, there's the title of the film right there."
yeah. But okay, so then gonna pause these thoughts, put a pin in that, and now we're gonna say that Fulci accused Wes Craven of ripping him off after he saw New
Wow.
Nightmare, because Fulci has a lot. His opinion of himself is very high. It's the thing we see with a lot of these Italian directors from this period. They are the best at what they do, and they because they're very much ripping each other off. That was the way the industry worked.
Hmm.
When you interview them in their 70s and 80s, they all accuse everyone else of ripping them off, and they all fucking hate each other.
Yeah.
It's very charming in a weird way. But so there's no way in hell that Wes Craven saw either of these movies. I don't think Wes Craven was that interested in horror movies in general. I just don't see him going out of his way to find these two movies that barely got releases in their home countries, let alone in North America. But
Yeah.
there are some weird coincidences between all three of these movies. And I made a little bullet point list here, that the weird likely coincidental similarities between Cat in the Brain, Hallucinations, and a Deranged Mind, and then also Wes Craven's New Nightmare, which quickly we'll just say New Nightmare was kind of like an attempt at rebooting the series after the Freddy's Dead didn't make any money, and Wes Craven was kind of coaxed back into doing it. And it is, I think, next to the remake, the worst Nightmare on Elm Street movie for me.
See, that's interesting too, because like, I mean, I since I
People
recent
really like it. I need to
since
acknowledge that
since I
some
was
people love it.
recently on the Directors Club 1994 retrospective, the my two film critic friends, Colin and Eric, who are on that show, really do love New Nightmare. And I wasn't about to like launch into a tirade and go, you know what, guys, actually, New Nightmare is not very good. I
Yeah.
just sort of just went with it and did focus on the fact, though, that I have never been a fan of the third act, the final like decision to have him go in this underground tunnel thing with the I mean it's weird. Like I saw this opening night with my friends in a packed crowd in the same theater I would eventually see Pulp Fiction in, and I'm going into this as a diehard Freddy Krueger fan already at that age. I
Yeah.
had no concept of self-awareness outside of maybe the Muppets or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But like this was a new Freddy movie. I was stoked, and I did walk out a fan, but I even at that time for seeing it before I became critical of movies, I was like, that last act, I was kind of disappointed by the fact that they sort of build it up that Freddy's going to cross over into their reality to where, he tears off the sheet of the bed,
Mhm.
and you think like he's going to come into Nancy's world again, almost similarly to like how they do in the original film. And that like kind of pumped me up. I'm like, oh, Freddy's going to come after her in this world. But no, I guess he just sort of kidnaps her son and takes him to this underground lair place of, you know, it's like another boiler room kind of
It's another,
setting.
and the big special effect is a big dumb tongue.
Yeah,
It's made like 10 years after Nightmare 3, and it's like a quarter of the imagination put
I
into
know. And it
the
just
production
really
design.
disappointed me because it felt like it was building to something really special, but I still acknowledge, especially now, I see a lot of flaws. I mean, I really do think like the best parts are, Nancy interacting with John Saxon. I like
Yeah.
those scenes quite a bit. I think they're both really good overall, but I don't really like the kid. I think Robert England is bad as
Yeah, I
Robert
mean Robert
England.
Englund's at least having some fun.
Yeah,
He's an interesting actor. I don't know if anybody was really prepared to play themselves. I think Heather Langenkamp comes across the best
I do
because
too. I think she's good.
she comes across the most natural, because she wasn't really acting very much anymore at that point.
I
And
know. I think
I
that's
think
why it
that
works.
paid off.
Yeah. That's the one thing I can say is like I think she makes it worth watching, but I'm still very disappointed by the
I
whole
think it's
film.
just boring, and the scenes where Wes Craven's explaining. So the idea is that
I laugh at that now, and I
if Wes Craven doesn't keep making Nightmare on Elm Street movies, this eldritch horror that is Freddy Krueger will enter our reality and start killing people. So he needs to make another movie to stop this from happening. And there are these really long, boring scenes of him explaining this to people, and it just doesn't have much going on. And we can say it was worth it because I don't think I don't think Craven makes Scream without this sort of
Oh
being in
yeah.
his mind already. I know he didn't write that script, but I think that when this movie didn't make a lot of money, he just didn't have that out of his system yet. And I think Scream is a much better version of it. And I think that there's a lot of direction. For Scream is such a slick movie, and you see like the beginnings of that slickness, which is super important to that whole era of slasher, self-aware slasher movies. Even the one, like they all felt like Scream ripoffs, even when they weren't directly being meta at us.
Yeah, like the Halloween H2O and
H2O, Valentine,
Urban
Urban
Legend.
Legend. Yep. The were the ones that were loosely based on a teen book. I Know What You Did Last Summer.
Uh-huh.
All that
Yeah.
stuff. Yeah. I mean, it had this cool slickness to it that really went out of favor real quick. Like
Oh yeah.
there was a period there in the early 2000s where it was like, nah, this ain't no bullshit corporate garbage. And we've gone far enough that
I
now we
got
can look
tired
back.
of seeing the Dimension logo pop up.
Yeah.
Like, oh no, it's another one of these. It's
Yeah.
Phantoms or Soul Survivors or
Yeah, yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so no, we've gone far enough now that we can recognize how good some of the at least the filmmaking was.
Oh
So
yeah, no, and Scream really just
and
like
Scream
I
is
had
just a good
zero
movie all
issues
around.
with that
Yep.
movie. Like when I saw it in that another one I saw opening night with a packed crowd, we didn't know what we were in for, and it just everything about it worked.
And so Scream was really, yeah, I know where you're coming from. Scream was a very important movie to me at that time. And it's one I feel like I can look back at and it's still really good, which is great because a lot of the stuff I watched as a teen and child, I watch again and I'm like, ugh.
Yeah, but like New Nightmare is, I mean,
It
it's
feels
not
of
scary,
its
it's
time in the
silly.
worst way.
Yeah, it
It
kind of does.
so I apologize if that's your favorite one. Like that's great. You know what? I'm a huge fan of Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Child. I think it's just this visual treat, and most people I think list that and the remake as the two worst.
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
I maybe I don't have a leg to stand on, but
And I'm
it's
the
not my.
weirdo that likes 4 a
I
lot.
like 4. I like 3's the best. I
Yeah,
like three,
three's the
four,
best.
five. I'll
Yeah.
watch 3, 4, 5 in a row, and I'll watch Freddy vs. Jason. I like the original. I think the second one's kind of dull without all the gay subtext. It's kind of forgettable.
Hmm.
So anyway, that's where I'm coming from. That's my opinion. That's also Jim's opinion. I kind of was hoping you would be a big fan of it and argue with me a little bit on this and push back at least. But it seems like we're kind of on the same
It's weird though. Like it's what I mean. I was with every rewatch over the years, it just kind of goes down for
I just
me.
don't watch it anymore. If I start to
Yeah.
do a series watch, like I just don't watch it anymore. I don't watch that or the remake. The remake is really god awful, though. It's
Oh yeah,
not
it's
nearly as bad as
unwatchable.
we have to say that much.
Yeah, and I keep hoping. I don't know if this is a good thing to wish for, but I'm all for another reboot of Freddy
Oh,
if
I
they
mean,
could do it right. Because you could do so much with dreams.
Freddy versus Jason, for all of its faults, proved that you can use over the top digital effects in such a fun way.
Sure.
In this kind of like honestly, in some ways, the faker it looks, the more it fits in a certain, like not necessarily faker, but the more unreal it looks. Like all the colorful stuff that happens in that movie is so much fun to
Yeah.
watch. And that's why I like the fifth one too. It has the part where where he turns into a two-dimensional comic book character and gets slashed up. I think that stuff's really neat, and that there's just not enough of it, and that the remake is so awful because it does nothing with
No.
that.
Mm-hmm. It's
Um,
sad. Yeah.
but anyway, so now that we've talked about these three movies, I wanna list some sort of familiarity, coincidental similarities, and so I can understand why Fulci was convinced he was being ripped off, even though there's no way in hell he was. In his film, Fulci plays a version of himself plagued by visions from his own movies and seeks out the help of a psychiatrist who secretly hypnotizes him into being framed for these murders. In Nightmares in a Damaged, I keep saying Damaged Brain. Hallucinations in a Deranged Mind. Nightmares in a Damaged Brain is the long title of that Italian kind of slasher movie. But Marins is the psychiatrist is the victim of movie-based hallucinations, and that Marins himself is an altruist who's brought in to try to cure him of his Coffin Joe obsession with hypnotism again. They use
Mm.
hypnotism again. And then in one case, the psychiatrist is a villain, which is just like Fulci. You see
Oh yeah.
all throughout his movies that he doesn't trust psychology, and partially because he was severely depressed. Uh, he had a daughter and a wife die, or no, his wife died, and his one of his daughters had a horrible accident and
Mm.
was disabled from it. So he had a rough life, and so he has this innate distrust of that kind of doctor. You see some of it in City of the Living Dead. One of the main characters is a
Yeah.
psychiatrist who's not helpful and is dating, or not dating, but sort of badly involved with one of his patients. In the long run, I think Fulci's, like I said, I guess I already kind of said this, but the ideology of Fulci movies is dulled, but in Hallucinations and Deranged Mind, it's sort of like it's so dark and irrational that it's like sort of made stronger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I mean, even if it's overkill, it's still like
yeah,
fascinating. And I mean, the idea that someone's art gets to them to the point where it can cause some kind of psychological damage, or at least like, I mean, it's causing these feelings and hallucinations and stuff. I think that's all interesting.
yeah. So then I'm going to bring up a thing, and this is going to be a surprise that I kind of warned you about, but this is a surprised four-way comparison, because there's one movie that Lucio Fulci definitely saw, and that's
Hmm.
Dario Argento's Tenebrae.
Oh,
Also
that's right.
insane. So Tenebrae is also semi-autobiographical. It is a giallo movie in the 80s, so it's a little more bloody, but I should say so both Tenebrae and New Nightmare being the movie that Fulci claims ripped him off. Both those movies are semi-autobiographical, and they're meant to purge each director's frustration with being artistically pigeonholed. Argento wanted to make fantasy movies, but Inferno flopped, and he was forced to return to giallo thrillers.
Mm.
And he is dissecting his own storytelling conventions. Fulci, by most accounts, was still happy to be the horror guy, but was frustrated with his lack of opportunity and his lack of budgets and stuff. And then Craven very famously did not want to be a horror guy and kept trying not to be a horror guy. Even just moving slightly away from it in something like Serpent and the Rainbow, it just wasn't making money, and it wasn't working. And so he sort of had to return to New Nightmare, and then he has a chip on his shoulder the whole time. you know, in Marins's case, he just has run out of money and he's still having a good time. I think Marins is sad because he doesn't have the freedom he once had, but he's still happy to be a showman. But in these other cases, these are guys who are frustrated with what's going on around
Yeah,
them.
I was gonna say all these films seem made based on a restlessness or
Yeah.
frustration with their art not being what they want it to be.
And I
You
mean,
know,
how else can you make a movie where you star as yourself, the tortured filmmaker, if you're not a little obsessed with your situation at the
and that's why
moment?
I want to give New Nightmare credit because it could have been. I mean, I think it would have been too much like Cat in the Brain if Wes Craven was the main focus of
Hmm.
New Nightmare. But focusing on Heather Langenkamp, Nancy, was kind of a nice touch,
Yeah.
and that's what at least carries it a little bit above and beyond for me at least. But it's just I don't know. Like I think getting that indulgent and self-aware and just thinking deeply about well what is my art not only doing to me but doing to the masses
Yeah.
is a really interesting thing to explore, and
And
all of these films do it in
all
different
f-
ways.
all four of them, including Tenebrae, all
Oh
four of
yeah.
them are either satirizing
Hmm.
or at least commenting on the reactionary assumption that violent entertainment can only be made by violent people and that it will cause violence. This is something that's also the theme of Videodrome. What's funny is Argento, well, he has a stand-in. Argento doesn't appear in Tenebrae. The main character is a writer who is a stand-in for him, and has a lot in common with him. And the twist in that movie, which I'm sorry I'm spoiling Tenebrae here, but the twist in that movie is there's actually two killers because the writer and main character takes advantage of the fact that there's murders happening and that he's investigating them to do murders. So I've always seen it that Argento is being a little tongue in cheek with, oh, maybe I am a killer. You don't know. Whereas Craven casts himself and has to keep writing Freddy. He's a good person. He's the hero who's keeping evil at bay. So they're kind of taking opposite stances here. And then Fulci's stance is this is absurd. Why are we even talking about this? The only reason this would happen is if my psychiatrist hypnotized me into believing it.
Yeah, oh, I think he has severe distrust. Like I think he thinks psychiatrists cause damage.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. He thinks that he doesn't want to talk about his feelings.
right.
And so these are the way these men are dealing with this. And David Cronenberg in Videodrome kind of comes up with the idea that yes, the violent entertainment does cause damage if you do something to the footage,
Mm,
and it like becomes contagious. But that in reality, the people who are railing against the violence are themselves the actual killers, sort of.
oh,
Like
interesting.
that's sort of the idea behind Videodrome, is that these people are causing violence to give you cancer, sort of. I mean, it's
Sure.
hard to really break down, but it's sort of the idea is that these are the people committing the violence. And this kind of goes back to something that's going to come up with the last movie we're going to cover is Censor, which is a new movie. This is something that's going to come up with Censor being about the video nasties panic, and I'll talk about that when we get to it. I'll be more context time with Gabe, but I like that these are different approaches. And then I guess Marins's approach is, yes, I am evil, and watching my movies will hurt you and cause evil. Like he's enjoying the idea of it. So Fulci thinks it's stupid. Argento is poking fun at it. Marins is loving it, and Wes Craven is resenting it and trying
Yeah,
to
yeah, I
make
can see
himself the
that.
hero. That's kind of the way I looked at it.
Yeah, and Craven is the gatekeeper in a way, but also just
Yeah,
it's it's clear that he wanted to evolve as a storyteller to the point of him. Everybody talks about the shock of him doing something like Music of the Heart, and just like
yeah,
completely getting out of the horror genre.
and it just didn't work.
No,
It just didn't work, and and it's too bad. I feel bad for him.
I wanted
Uh,
him to just keep making movies like Red Eye because I thought
yeah.
he was a really good thriller
Hmm.
filmmaker. I mean, at least in that like Hitchcockian kind of setup, I thought that was really well done. And I kept thinking, like, you don't have to go into the slasher territory. You could do
Right.
things like this instead. But no, he had to go and do My Soul to Take.
Yeah. Which, yeah, who got, yeah. I mean,
Oof.
and so there's a fun similarity between these things, and that the
Hmm.
idea that it's, I think that, and I say this as a absolute lover of the man's work, I think Fulci was sort of ripping off Argento. I know that he was aware because he talked about Argento movies all the time, and
Oh
he
yeah,
did
yeah.
he did stuff in his movies to reference Argento movies. The seeing eye dog attacking the woman in The Beyond is a reference to the seeing
Mm.
eye dog attacking the man in Suspiria.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then I think Craven is coming at it without any knowledge of this other stuff, and then Marins is coming to it before other people are doing it, and it's just very interesting, the difference in the approaches, but then how many weird facts, like all the hypnotism and psychiatrist stuff, how much it's sort of like a game of telephone where there are these weird things in common and they're in the wrong context.
Mm. Yeah, again, like I also wish New Nightmare would have dug deeper into like just is the generational trauma, but also like they at one point Nancy's like, oh, my mother had schizophrenia or something like that, and like,
And
am I
she,
passing that
yeah,
on to my son? And then the doctor is all concerned that she's mentally unstable. Like all that could have really gone into interesting territory, but it's like a movie at war with itself because it also has to be a Freddy movie too.
yeah. And I think Craven tried too hard to intellectualize it. He tried too hard to
Hmm.
make it some sort of uh oh god, what's the hero's journey guy? Um
Campbell.
yeah, he tried to turn it into Campbellist, like discussing the nature of evil in
Yeah, yeah,
fiction.
that
It doesn't really work. And I think Fulci, another thing I could think Fulci, not only could he have used his own footage, but he goes out of his way to not do any self-assessment, and he could have done interesting stuff with, like, eyeballs, for instance. There's so
oh,
much
oh.
eyeball violence in Fulci movie. Well, like do a thing about eyeballs. Do more eyeball stuff. Or there, he's accused of being a misogynist all the time. Do something with that, because, like, there's misogynistic things in his movies. There's misogynistic interviews with him where he says he doesn't trust women, and everybody attributes that to his wife dying and him just becoming severely depressed.
Hmm.
And so there was stuff he could have done if he wanted to, but he just doesn't want to do self-assessment. He just wants to be the guy in the movie, sort of, and make a clip show.
Yeah, and guys like Kevin Smith just like, he just like kind of reveled in that stuff to where
Yeah.
by the time you get like Jay and Silent Bob reboot or whatever the hell it was, it's just like the Ouroboros kind of
Yeah.
approach. It's just like at one point Kevin Smith is playing himself in the movie, but he's also playing Silent Bob, and I'm just like, oh my god, this is out of control.
I mean, I got sick of it with just Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, and
Yeah,
that was pretty early in the game.
I still laugh at the Miramax stuff towards the end. Like that's
Yeah,
the
I mean,
only
there's
thing
good
about it.
jokes. There's
Yeah,
good jokes for sure,
the
but
Goodwill Hunting too.
yeah,
That
yeah.
stuff is funny.
Bomb and the Phantom. He was the Bomb and the Phantom. The fact that it doesn't Ben Affleck play two different characters in that?
Oh yeah, that also yeah, that gets confusing. I don't know
Yeah,
why. It's just
that's
weird.
kind of funny, I suppose.
Yeah.
No, the best joke in that whole movie actually is the one where Gus Van Sant can't pay attention because he's busy counting his
Yeah.
his money from Goodwill Hunting.
Yeah.
That's a good joke. I'll give him that one. How about that?
They should have had Wes Craven doing the same thing with
Yeah, I'm too busy counting my receipts from my residuals from Nightmare on Elm Street. Though the real joke there would have to be that he didn't get those because it was New Line, and New Line was
Oh.
famous. Robert Shea was famous, so, like, he didn't get much for that, and then that became a big around about 10 years after that. You have the big lawsuit between Peter Jackson and New Line
That's right.
because
Yeah.
of them pretending that Lord of the Rings wasn't profitable and that they don't have to pay him anything.
Oh my
see
god.
now, see now, if you somehow made a Freddy, he made that outside of New Line, it might have worked better because then he could have
Mm.
talked more shit about New Line.
Yeah, that would have been fun. You know what's not much fun?
Our
The,
next film.
the last horror movie.
So moving beyond that whole thing, a different kind of meta movie is a movie that is aware of its medium, and it's like the medium itself is something. And so a lot of found footage horror has that going on. Another movie that does that is Fight Club. Fight Club does that really well. Fight Club does the whole thing when you're watching the movie and the movie itself is like part of the story, and the joke that Tyler Durden's in the theater with you and that kind of stuff. Oh, Gremlins 2, beautiful job with that.
Right. Yeah.
Completely until this second forgot Gremlins 2. That I saw in the theaters.
I guess that was maybe my first.
Yeah, I saw that in theaters as a kid. Yeah. So that was a big one for me. I loved that movie. So we covered I tried to pick one I hadn't seen because we had covered a lot of found footage horror movies already on thing. And so I had heard decent things about Julian Richards' The Last Horror Movie from 2003, which is not to be confused with David Winters's The Last Horror Film. And that is a pseudo sequel to Bill Lustig's Maniac.
Right.
Which is itself actually kind of a meta movie because it takes place at Cannes, and Caroline Munro kind of plays a version of herself. but we've already done that kind of thing. What we're going for now is this sort of like the found footage thing where the filmmaker is speaking directly to you, the viewer.
Yeah.
And so this was one of a handful of movies that was released under Fangoria's defunct Gore Zone label. And it was on DVD here in the US via that. And I don't know about you, but as someone who spent a lot of time at used DVD stores, this was everywhere.
This looks familiar. Yeah, I saw the cover and I'm like, I know I've seen this before.
So many people bought this or got it and didn't want it and sold it. And it just sat on the shelves of the used place, which should have been my first cue that it probably wasn't very good. If something is omnipresent at the used DVD store, it's probably a bad
Or maybe they were afraid they were going to get killed by him if they took it seriously
maybe it
enough.
did freak him out too much.
The British Patrick Bateman talking right into the camera. Oh boy.
Well, and the idea here is very, very clever in concept.
Yeah.
Is a serial killer has recorded over a rental tape and returned it to Blockbuster or mom and pop store or whatever, back on the shelf. It's still labeled. You've tried to rent, well, let's say Wes Craven's New Nightmare. It's 1994. You went to go rent Wes Craven's New Nightmare, but it's actually a real video of a real murderer doing snuff shit. That's a really genuinely freaky, like, that's good.
Yeah. It's like Henry Lee Lucas if he just decided to record over VHS tapes and put them in videos.
And that's the problem with a lot of found footage is what's the purpose here? Why is this found? Why was this made? Who is this made for? Why didn't someone put the camera down? Like that. This is a really clever way to get around all that. And why was this discovered is another one. Unfortunately, and we won't even talk. I'm not even talking about the execution here. Unfortunately, there weren't a lot of mom and pop shops renting out stuff in 2003 on VHS. It was really on its way out. This movie was made almost 10 years too late, maybe more like 15 years too late. If this was made in 1985, it's a fucking great idea. And I bet that it would have a reputation with kids who rented it and convinced their little brother that no, this is real. We rented something else.
Yeah. I love that idea, but
yeah. Well, and another thing they do badly is they open it with regular credits.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It doesn't open with just like him introducing himself. Like there's an opening credit thing.
Yeah, there's like a diner, like they're trying to do a slasher movie.
Well, even before that, there's like literally just credits, like the film you're gonna watch with like canned crappy library scary music.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
It should just go straight into the fake movie. Right. Which is a clever idea that there's like this crappy slasher taking place at a diner, and then that gets interrupted. That's okay. You don't even need to do that well, and it would still kind of work. It has a good idea, and it's just not there. It's just not.
Nah, I didn't really. I didn't like the lead guy very much.
I will say, I think he is a good actor. And I
Yeah.
think he sells because he has these soliloquies. He's a sort of Patrick Bateman type. He sells these really, really asinine things that only a, you know, sociopath who thinks he's God's gift to the world would say.
Hmm.
That's hard
Yeah.
to do. And I think he does do that part right.
Yeah. I
Um
mean, sometimes I roll my eyes though because it almost becomes funny games esque where he's like addressing the camera. So you want to see this? You want to watch this? Why do you want me to watch? Why do you want to watch these brutal things I'm about to do? Like he
yeah.
does that at one point, and I kind of go, "Oh boy, well, I'm watching this. I'm sorry." It's almost like they're trying to guilt me into like enjoying it or something. I don't know. I mean, it's like you become a participant in the narrative in a way. Like I don't know. It's not choose your own adventure territory, but it's something like along those lines where they're like, you gotta think about why you're watching what you're watching, and if
Mhm.
it's like, uh, think about your own morality.
Yeah, and there's something about the idea of this character over intellectualizing it that could
Hmm.
be cool, but it really does feel like it's the filmmakers over intellectualizing
Yeah,
it.
yeah. That's what
Well,
I get
and
out of it.
the big problem here is that there's another movie that does it so much better that I didn't talk about because we talked about it on the scariest movie moments, which is Man Bites Dog, the French film.
Oh yeah, 100%.
And everything that movie does right, this movie doesn't do right. And I did find a short interview with the director on JoeBlow.com where he claims his inspiration was he read the Stephen King nonfiction book Dance Macabre,
Hmm.
and he got him thinking about the War of the Worlds, the Orson Welles War of the Worlds, and how that movie scared people, or that radio play scared people into thinking it was real, and how Texas Chainsaw Massacre was advertised on the basis that it was a true story when it wasn't. And then Blair Witch came out.
Oh yeah, everybody thought that was real
And
for a
so he
while.
was connecting those dots in his head. But then later in the interview, he mentions that he was aware of and studied Man Bites Dog. And so you're like,
Okay.
oh, well, you have all these good ideas, but it kind of seems like you just tried to make Man Bites Dog in England with VHS. Um,
Yeah. And I don't know, the kills aren't that interesting. I mean, a lot of the
no, I mean, okay, yeah, we can go into that right away. We can
setting
just
people
say,
on fire and all that. I'm like,
as as something released under Fangoria's Gore Zone label, there's no fucking gore in this
I
movie.
know, I was shocked. Yeah.
And it has that dirtiness to it of it,
Mhm.
like if you had some good gore in this movie, it would be really disturbing. It would be really icky because it would
Yeah, it's
feel
got the
more real.
digital grain and yeah,
Yeah.
it's like it's shot on a Sony camera you could buy at Best Buy or something.
Yeah. So like early digital quality. Like this is
Yeah.
something that doesn't need to be on Blu-ray because it couldn't be on Blu-ray. It doesn't get that high of resolution. And so it could have worked. So yeah, I'm losing my train of thought. So yes, the violence is not cool or scary or shocking. It's almost all out of frame, and I'm
Right.
guessing that was actually to save money because it's expensive to do uh, gore effects.
It makes
Um,
sense. Yeah.
but it also just like it doesn't have any scary impact to it. Like I don't know. I guess there's no gore in Blair Witch, but there's like the implications of violence are really frightening,
Yeah.
and like
That works on a deep
sound
psychological
design.
level.
Yeah, there's a sound design to it. And this
Mhm.
just doesn't have any of that. He just sort of kills people. And it's also not funny.
No.
And Man Bites Dog is really darkly amusing. It's a comedy. And so Man Bites Dog is about a there's an interest, and there's what should be an interesting dichotomy between these two movies. Man Bites Dog is a movie about a film crew that is aware of a serial killer that decides to follow the serial killer around, and the serial killer's kind of bemused by this, and so he's just showing them how he does stuff, and eventually they get involved with the murders,
Right.
and it's a very clearly a metaphor for violence in media, and the way, and by media I mean like news media, and the way that this is treated. There's like a very clear through line metaphor. It's very funny. It's got ideas. This movie also involves a videographer,
Ugh.
but he's been hired by the guy.
Right.
He's so the whole point is the filmmaker can't objectively observe the murder is the point of Man Bites Dog. They can't. You become part of the
Yeah.
documentary.
You can't separate yourself.
Whereas this videographer is basically hired on the we learn later on the idea that he will eventually participate in the murders.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't do anything interesting with the idea of this guy trying to bring, like, there are
No, he
stories
just
about
freaks out about it, and
there
yeah.
are stories about people who are trying to create like that's what there's 3 seasons of the Hannibal TV show about a lonely murderer who's trying to recruit and seduce another murderer. Like, it can be a really interesting idea, but it's just sort of something that happens in this movie, and when he
Yeah.
can't go through with it, like, it's not about him being corrupted. It's like the opposite, where he realizes he's not corrupt. Whereas in Man Bites Dog, it's like they become corrupted by what the evil of killing
Yeah.
people.
Yeah. By being a part of it, by observing it, yeah, and it's kind of sad. Like, you kind of want that same vibe to like invade this movie or something, and it just kind of, I don't know. I don't know. It just felt lazy to me. I don't know that it really brought a whole lot of interesting insight to what something like Man Bites Dog did. Like, this isn't like an updating of what that film did. It's like an attempt to do that,
Hmm.
but it just kind of just lies there for the most part. But
I mean,
it's
I have more things that it does wrong here.
yeah, no, I mean, there's plenty.
I got a whole list. We can talk about the idea that not only is it not violent, but it doesn't use the video in any sort of interesting way. And the thing
Mm-mm.
that kept on popping into my mind is how chilling the scene in Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer is,
Oh God.
where the camera's mostly lopped off and it's just witnessing, and we can't look away because we are the camera.
Yeah.
Whereas in this case, it's almost all handheld. And so I think that by having a videographer with him, it it makes it less scary. Whereas if it was just this guy going around with a camera, and by the way, they write his day job is a wedding videographer,
Right.
which they keep threatening to do interesting things with. Like, he keeps catching people saying really fucked up things to the camera about, like, oh, I just married her so she would shut up and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like, and that's sort of a better film would do something more substantial with that being part of his sort of Patrick Bateman outlook on the world, that
Hmm.
like everything's just meat kind of thing.
Yeah.
That would, the idea that he worked in this job that just fed that, and that he works at a job that's a meat parade. It's just weddings, and everybody's fake. Like, it's an interesting concept and it's on its own as like a separate movie that's not as meta. That's just about a psychopathic wedding videographer who uses that job as a way to find victims and create a feedback loop with his own ideology, and then film himself killing people, not hire some guy. It's like, I don't know, it's just like the ideas are there, the director gets a little too, he overthinks it.
Yeah. It gets a little smug.
Like,
I
you
don't
have
know.
he's working a voyeuristic job already. It just
Hmm.
seems like that's when it comes to that. Oh, he's a weddingographer by day. I'm like, oh, that's really clever. That's a great thing. Like, but it just isn't. It just doesn't do anything with it.
No, and yeah, and it's funny, when I was watching this, I was thinking, I'd like to watch something. I don't know. I don't want to say with like more of a sense of humor, but I mean, he takes himself seriously, but also it's just, there's this really kind of out there. I'm sure you've seen it. This, uh, and it's obviously not necessarily in the same vein because it's not, found footage, but Jeff Lieberman did this movie called Remote Control,
Hmm.
and I watched that a lot as a kid.
I used to
I
watch
was
it on VHS.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just the idea of aliens making this mind control video that they put into video stores, and whenever somebody rents it and watches this video, they become psychopathic killers. I just thought that was such a fun, cool little concept. Again, maybe it becomes more of like, towards the end, a typical like confronting the aliens and blow things up kind of
Mhm.
approach to the story, which is disappointing because I honestly thought that idea itself really brought a lot to that. Just what does it mean when you watch these movies, and what does it do to your mind? But at the same time, it's also a fun B movie too.
Mhm.
But this wasn't fun. I don't know.
Mhm.
I wanted something else, and it just didn't flow. It just didn't work. I just kind of got bored watching it over, especially him. I just didn't think he was an engaging, charismatic character to follow for the whole movie.
I mean, and I also think if we're just looking at this from the standpoint of a meta horror movie and a discussion about horror movies,
Mm-hmm.
the fact that he has a videographer with him means he's just talking to the
That's
cameraman. He's
true.
not
Yeah,
talking to us.
right. That's a good
Like
point.
sometimes he is when he's by himself, he's talking to us, but as soon as we know there's another guy in the room, it just feels like he's just doing a Hannibal Lecter and just describing his ideology at someone,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and it uh, there's a way this could work. You definitely have to change the name of the movie if you remade it, but there's a way this could work.
It's like The Last Exorcism Part 2.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. The only other meta thing in this movie is that can't remember if his sister is
Oh,
ex
yeah.
is in a play, and she has to practice dying for the play, and
That's
they
right.
film it.
Yeah.
So there's like a third level of meta to it, which is sort of clever. There's a lot of
Yeah.
good ideas here. There's a lot of good ideas. You could make this into an interesting movie, but it just doesn't work as it is
No,
now.
I felt pretty disengaged by it, whereas Censor, I
Yes.
quite like.
So Censor, we're going to go way forward in time. We're going to go more into the idea of the medium itself being evil, which is another just different kind of meta, but still kind of in the same category as the found footage thing.
Mm-hmm.
And this is from 2021. This didn't get much release, but it is on Hulu. If you want to watch it, I think it will be on Hulu in perpetuity. It's just one of those things that Hulu has. I think Disney or Fox must have had the rights to it. This is directed by Prano Bailey Bond, and this is her feature debut, but she had made a short version of this that she expanded into
Oh.
the feature.
Hmm.
Yeah, this isn't about a creator doing a thing about themselves. This is about the medium. And so some other examples of that are, we go back to Videodrome again, where the medium itself can kill you. There's a 2014 movie called The Canal.
Oh,
It was
man.
also British,
Yeah.
or maybe Scottish, one or the other, that is about a man who finds a video, who's watching an old video and sees murder, and
It's actually Irish. That's right.
Irish.
Yes. I remember seeing this.
It's pretty good. There's a not very good movie that's very popular called Sinister, where Ethan
Yeah.
Hawke finds a video of murder and stuff, and I mean that's probably the one more people have
Yeah,
seen.
the movies he finds, I think, if I recall, are kind of creepy.
Yeah. That part kind of works. The problem
Yeah.
is that the killer looks like he's in fucking Slipknot, which is a problem throughout that director's filmography.
Yeah.
Black Phone, everybody loved Black Phone. I watch it, fucking Slipknot.
Yeah.
Slipknot again. Ethan Hawke in a Slipknot mask.
Pretty much.
Even his Doctor Strange movie is getting this close to Slipknot masks. I'm just thinking someone at Marvel said, no more Slipknot masks. And then Berberian Sound Studio is a movie
Oh, yeah.
that reminded me of this, that I think everybody should see and love. Peter Strickland, not his debut, but his breakthrough movie, I would say.
There's a great box set in the works, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
I haven't seen his first film still, so I need
Yeah.
to.
It's good.
I don't think I need to own his latest one, but man, those middle three.
I know.
Well, I guess he did a Bjork concert movie too, which I haven't seen. But
Oh, wow.
his
That's cool.
middle three fictional films, just top of the line. This reminds me of that. This is a movie that when it was coming out, when I saw the trailer, to make it meta, it was like one of those things of like, did someone accidentally make a movie just for me?
Gabe Nip. That's what we call it. Yeah.
Like, the idea here is that this is a movie about a woman who works for the BBFC, the British Board of Film Classification, as a censor at the height of the video nasties moral panic. And it's a horror movie about a neurotic woman losing her mind, which is already one of my favorite genres. Like all that shit we Bill and I covered all these 70s movies, like Let's Scare Jessica to Death, and Images, and there's a bunch of giallo that are the same way.
Oh yeah,
Gialli
I
that are the
love those
same way.
kind of movies.
It's just a
Images, sign me
really
up. Yeah.
it's just a really like something about vulnerable women losing their minds, and like it's just a metaphor for loneliness or
Mm-hmm.
repulsion's another one,
Yeah.
not to give Roman Polanski too much credit, but that is one of the more important ones there.
I'm sure my own therapist would have a field day trying to
Yeah.
figure out why I love those movies so much.
Yeah, there's a book called House of Psychotic Women that's a part autobiographical, part critical dissection of movies like this by
Mm-hmm.
Kirla Janice, I think is how you say her last name.
Kayla Janice, yeah.
Yeah, and that's a great book and I just almost every movie she covers in that, even the ones that suck, are still like, yeah, I mean, this is an interesting movie. So
It is.
Censor is just connecting these things, and there is a Blu-ray from Vinegar Syndrome that has commentary tracks that I probably should have gone out of my way to buy and watch. And so
I might have to get that too.
I'm covering this. I don't want to do a lot of spoilers because this is a pretty new movie, and I want to admit that this is just me making assumptions about a lot of stuff. I don't know a lot about the making of this film because I haven't watched any of the behind the scenes stuff. I've just seen it
Yeah, I don't
twice.
know a whole lot about it either. I just
Um,
just the experience of it. Still, like it's very unnerving, and
had you seen it before? Was this your first
yeah,
time?
I'd seen it before,
Okay.
and I guess it's one of those that like because oh boy, it's something I've been having a conversation with a lot of people about lately is that it does. I don't want to say like all these A24 and neon movies sort of blend together
Uh-huh.
to where I get them like they kind of all get mashed up in my brain at times, like Saint Maud, and like
Mhm.
there's a lot of these things that I know I saw this and I was like, as I'm watching this movie, I'm like, oh yeah, this one actually really worked on me. I just forgotten how effective it was because like I we've talked about this in the past too. When I grew up, my friends and I were always renting movies almost like as a dare or a challenge. Like
Mhm.
what's the weirdest thing we can find, or in some cases the grossest thing. And of course, we discovered the Faces of Death movies.
Right.
And even back then, I'm watching them going, what is this doing to my brain? Because
Yeah.
I don't know if I should be watching this. I don't know if this qualifies as entertainment. I mean, I had a friend who had a pet rabbit and he was just so upset because there's a segment where we see rabbits getting skinned alive. And I'm like, what? Why would somebody edit this? Why would somebody put this out into the world? And so as I've gotten older, I think there's going to be no new viewing of Cannibal Holocaust for me anytime soon. It's
Yeah.
just, I'm not saying like I'm too sensitive, I can't handle it anymore, but it's just, I don't know if it doesn't appeal to me. So that's why the opening parts of this movie really do work. It's magic on me in like in a psychological way, whereas like once it sort of becomes more about the mystery, I wouldn't say it loses me. I'm just not as engaged by it as I am like just the overall setup and her working. So it's very much like Barbarian Sound Studio, like her just
Yeah.
sitting in that editing bay.
For me, that's the minutia of the censoring process is
Mm-hmm.
really
Yeah,
special. The idea that I'm seeing some real clips. The opening credits have clips from actual video nasties,
sure.
which I'm
Yeah,
going to go into that in a second, but I want to set this up a little more first. And then there are scenes from the fake movies that are created to sort of reenact some of the video nasties, and I'm recognizing that there's this serotonin rush that comes with that sort of minutia of it. That's more of what the original short is about.
yeah,
um
yeah.
and yeah, you kind of already answered the question, but I was going to ask is if it does this work as a horror film outside of that context, and would other people enjoy this as much as me? And I think you kind of answered that question already by saying that once the mystery starts unfolding, you think it loses a little bit.
Just a little bit.
Yeah,
Not
it's
not
still
to not,
good, but
not to a degree to where I'm like, oh, I don't like it anymore. I wouldn't say like because nowadays I almost feel like I'm using this too often as a crutch, as a descriptor, but the Lynchian vibe a bit
uh-huh.
towards the end where it becomes like is this a hallucination, is this reality, what is really happening, that sort of experience. I'd love that normally, and maybe it's because like it's, and again, Barbarian Sound Studio, it certainly does
Hmm.
that to an extreme degree, and I don't get disengaged by it. Uh, I think probably like we're talking about just the minutia, the behind the scenes, just like what is this doing to her, and the masses like reacting to her approval of a particular movie that may or may not have caused copycat killings or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that whole part of the movie really, yeah. I mean, I almost wanted to stay that, but I'm also not necessarily like, oh, I'm so disappointed that now it becomes about what happened to her sister.
Mhm.
I'm still interested in what happens, but it does become more kind of surreal. But I still think the visuals during that are still creepy and effective. So
Well, and yeah, you keep bringing up Lynchian stuff when we talk, and for me, I like Lynch, but more in idea than practice. I'm a bit more of a Cronenberg guy for the
yeah, yeah.
early Cronenberg, and for me, Videodrome is another thing that comes up a lot with this one.
Hmm.
Is that the idea that it's a sort of reverse of Videodrome, where in Videodrome it is someone who is they're both incurring psychic damage from the things they see,
Yeah,
but one
yeah,
of them
yeah.
is seeking out transgression because he wants to show the worst shit on his UHF station, or not even UHF. It's like pirate satellite station.
Hmm.
And the other one, it is her job to keep people from having to see that stuff. But they both end up getting this sort of psychic damage from it. And in both cases, the filmmakers don't believe that. And we know the filmmakers don't believe that. The filmmakers aren't saying, this is a thing and this will that watching bad stuff will be bad for you, but they're playing with the idea of it.
Right. And that's inherently interesting to me. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know if ultimately like I understand what happens, and and that's the other thing too. Is like I don't need to understand everything that
No, this
happens in
one,
the movie.
I get Videodrome and Barbarian both kind of end in a way that you aren't sure what's real and what's not,
Yeah,
and that's kind of fine because that's part of the madness that's happened. You want the character to be just completely mad at the end, and so you as the audience have to be kind of mad with them.
but could you see this like falling under the? I don't like reducing it to like, well, A24 puts out this kind of movie.
Elevated horror.
Yes, that's it. Of
But
course.
the other thing I see passed around a lot is trauma horror.
Yeah, yeah,
And
that's
and the
huge.
thing is in both those cases, those terms are both based on the rise of some really good movies. And yes, there is something to be said. It's the same thing that we were talking about when the Scream brand got old. People started to reject it. But
Mm,
when you go back and watch the good slick slashers of that period, they still work and they're just part of their period. So I think we just need to wait a little while and step back and look at this quote elevated trauma horror, A24 horror, whatever you want to call it. And I think that the cream rises to the
yeah,
top.
yeah.
And
That would make sense. Yeah.
and then so this movie I think works for that, but it does fit that mold. So if someone is sick of elevated and trauma horror, this is maybe not going to be the best movie for them. And that's fair. And it's like, maybe just put it on your watch list and give it get away from those kinds of movies for a while if you're
I
sick
can
of
see
them.
people being burnt out.
Yeah,
You know.
it's totally fine to get burnt out on anything. Like, I'm shocked I'm not burnt out on some of the things I like. I think it says something about, I think that, like, I have undiagnosed spectrum disorder or something, because there are just certain things I just don't get sick of, even though every Giallo movie is this. There's only like maybe 10 Giallo movies that have been spread over several hundred. It's the same thing over and over again.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I mean,
but
some people get that way about romantic comedies of all
yeah,
things. You know, it just
yeah, Christmas movies.
sure. Yeah,
Christmas romances, especially. I mean, they even have the same posters, but it's part of. I don't know. But if you're burned out on it, maybe this isn't the place to go for it. But the other thing going on here, that is part of that elevated horror that gets wrapped up in the trauma horror thing, is the politics. And
mm,
Videodrome is actually made in the 80s, so it has this backdrop of political upheaval. This one, it takes place at the height of Margaret Thatcher's sort of reign over
yeah,
England. And there's lots of very blatant political theming throughout this. There's archival footage of the police beating people. There's footage of Thatcher just being a piece of shit. There's so much going on that I think it gets a little lost. But the part of the story, which could be its own movie, where the idea, she's that's really that is the basic plot, is she's just tasked with censoring movies, and she has a past where her sister disappeared and she was suspected in the disappearance, and that's really all we really know. But there is this sort of subplot where she lets a movie through, and there is a supposed, like you said, copycat killing.
Right.
And the way that the public gets, somebody leaks her name and phone number to the public, so she's getting doxxed basically. And I think a so overlooked thing that happens in the movie is the people doxing her are saying the most vile things.
Oh yeah.
And it's like that idea, going back to what we were talking about with Tenebrae and Cat in the Brain, where the real bastards, and Videodrome, the real bastards are the ones who want the censorship to happen.
Mm.
The ones that are obsessed with the censorship, they're the real violent people, not the people watching this stuff for fun. It's the people who want to tell everyone else what they should and shouldn't want to watch. And so,
Censorship is the enemy. Yeah, that's makes sense. I
and
could
it's not
see that.
just that it's the enemy, it's that the people who become obsessed with it
Hmm.
are the enemy. And so
Yeah.
I'm gonna, how do you know a lot about the video nasties phenomenon?
I don't. I know a little bit about what happened, but I mean, of course, I know certain titles that fall under that
Yeah.
umbrella.
So the basic, this is again me having OCD, and I've read 2 books on the subject, and I've watched every documentary I can get my hands on.
God
So,
bless you, because we learn so much.
but it's just like, I don't know, I just find it really interesting, because in America we had the MPAA, especially during the 80s and 90s, was a little strict on violence and sex. And like we always talk about how, now that things go straight to streaming, that's one advantage to streaming, is that the MPAA rating doesn't matter as much anymore.
That's a good point. Yeah.
So we definitely had problems when Blockbuster wouldn't carry the NC-17 or unrated cuts of things, and they would have to make a crappy R-rated cut of something like Dead Alive. So we have that, but in England they're literally banned. And so what happened was, is in the early 80s, somebody figured out there was a loophole in the laws that allowed for video renting and purchasing to bypass the censorship process. So if a film was either censored or banned in England, say Cannibal Holocaust, flat out banned in England, well, it's not banned on home video because that is a different format. And so somebody figured this out, and it became a very easy moral panic. It was, it's the same moral panic it always is. It's satanic
Satanic
panic.
panic. Yeah.
It's shit going on with blaming queer people and drag queens for something that has nothing to do with anything. It's think of the children.
Yep.
It's the Simpsons joke. Will someone please think of the children? And so there's public figures like Mary Whitehouse and these really salacious, awful tabloids, which we all know the UK has the worst tabloids in the world. And they start this moral panic and like, oh, look at all these things. And we did this research, and we talked to children, and they saw all these movies and they're describing things. Well, of course the children hadn't seen the movies, and the children were just making it up because the interviewer was like, oh yeah, and then what happens? And then like, and then he ate her boob. Oh yeah, and then what happens? And then he threw up her boob and ate it again. The kid's just making shit up that sounds gross,
Yeah.
and feeding off the energy of this. And then they started to try to tie actual crimes and murders to movies. So there was like a Rambo murder. It had nothing to do with Rambo. But because this guy murdered people and Rambo was on video, they called it the Rambo murder. There was a really heinous thing that happened in the early 90s where 2 young boys tortured and killed a toddler, and everything decided it was because of Child's Play 3 of all things.
Oh my lord.
And like we can kind of laugh at it, but what the law did is it made it so that authorities, as part of the Obscene Publication Act, could confiscate these things.
Right.
So it wasn't just that they weren't available anymore. It was like, in America, shit, we can't find the NC-17 cut of Man Bites Dog isn't available at Blockbuster. That sucks. No, it's if you own that, now the police can raid your home as if you have, and that's happened, and it ruined people's lives. People who collected these things would be put in prison as if they were holding contraband.
Oh my god! Like if
And
I'd bought in Faces of Death, I could have been arrested.
yes, exactly. And they could have had a warrant to search your house, and if they found it, and so there was a list of officially banned movies. There's a list, and there was a list of like movies that aren't officially banned, but if you find them during one of these raids, you can also confiscate them. And of course, the cops didn't know about any of this because they're fucking cops. And what do cops know? I just got a text. And cops are doing stuff like the famous one is somebody had a copy of The Big Red One, which is a war drama,
Oh yeah.
but they were convinced that it was a porno.
Oh god.
So like we can laugh about some of the stuff, but it did ruin people's
Yeah, that's
it did ruin people's lives.
awful.
And the other thing that happened was that I just thought of comic books in the 50s. That was another,
Mm.
And violent video games in the 90s. It's just this shit happens every 10 years. I mean, there's just a new fucking thing. Libraries are a big victim of it right now. You work at a library, you're seeing that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so the thing is that a lot of the movies on this list are terrible, violent movies, but so many of them are so bad that they would have just been forgotten. There are some unwatchably stupid movies on the Video Nasties list, and they probably would have just been forgotten by the world, except for that they ended up on this list. So every collector across the world had to, like, I have to see this movie now. Why
Oh
is it
yeah.
banned in England? And there's kind of a Holocaust, Faces of Death. Yeah, you'll watch one, you'll go, I can understand why this was deemed objectionable, but mostly it's just trash and silly trash at that. So that's the backdrop of what's going on in this movie. That you don't need that backdrop to appreciate the movie, but it kind of makes it extra special because you know how stupid her job is. They kind of do a good job of. There's one of the censors just keeps like going, ugh, it was just this thing. They do it all the time in other movies. It's like, well, what about the part where the eyeball gets ripped out? And it's like, I seen that in and he mentions like some high-minded thing. He's Un Chandelo.
Yeah.
He's like, that
Yeah.
happens in Chandelo. Do we have to censor that too? And it's like it is sort of making it clear how stupid this is. But what makes the character interesting is that she's a true believer in the process.
In censoring things.
And so there's kind of a I think an implication that that's why it causes psychic damage to her, because she believes it will.
Yeah, that's an interesting angle. I hadn't thought of that way, but yeah.
But I mean, that's always part of the argument is like, we can't let the public see these movies because it will turn them into deranged maniacs. It's like, well, the censors saw them and didn't become deranged maniacs. Why is that? And the excuse they don't want to say is, well, we're smarter than you and we're better people than you. And they know they can't say that. So they're like, well, they're just trained to not go become crazy maniacs. I think it's a very tongue-in-cheek response to that.
Yeah, and sometimes when these things end up like on a notorious list, I mean, it only makes you want to seek them out more.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the thing too. Is like I even seeing something like Evil Dead early on. A lot of that had to do with the fact that, like, oh my god, this is as intense and extreme as it gets, and there's sexual abuse via tree, and like, I mean, there's like a lot of things that you think about now and you kind of go, wow. I mean, I wouldn't say that's tame, but like there's just,
it's silly.
It does seem silly to just
it's
harp
comic
on
book
that.
it's comic book violence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nowadays. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
just, but it's, like I really liked the framing and, just what they decide to do with her character, and the actress is very good in it throughout. I almost want like another movie set in this world where it doesn't necessarily have to go down the trauma surrealist route necessarily. I wouldn't say I want a more grounded version of something like this, but I just like where we're at, and thinking about, and like this was a thought-provoking movie, and I hadn't expected it necessarily to be that in the way we're talking about it. Like I thought, like, oh, this is just going to be another one of those movies where you just get caught up in a mystery and what happened, and we find out, and there's a big twist or something, and it really isn't that. And that's what I like about it. So I hope this filmmaker does more.
Yeah. Well, see, so another thing that I think this movie does cleverly is it is a pretty potent satire of this kind of censorship.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, there is like a genuine theme about how she is a woman working in a man's world, and
Yeah.
she's censoring heavily misogynistic movies, and the people around her saying sexist things to her. And because she gets there's this sort of obsession she has of solving the thing, and for her it ties back to this trauma about her sister. But it's a similar thing that happens in like Dario Argento movies, where an amateur sleuth gets overly obsessed and puts
Mm-hmm.
themselves in dangerous situations trying to figure out the mystery. I guess there's some of that in Zodiac, the movie Zodiac.
Oh
he
yeah.
he goes, but in her case she is putting herself in a situation with men that from her point of view we perceive as dangerous. And um she knows this, and so she's frightened about it, but she's also fascinated in trying to figure things out. And she's sort of um that sort of leads to her doing acts of violence.
Yes.
uh and so her confusion with the threat of men who are just assholes, there's an interesting idea there. Like, I don't know about the morality of the idea of a woman sort of enacting violence. Like, it doesn't approach it like you would a revenge movie with a woman who like
Mm-hmm.
purposely goes out her way to do violence against men who have done violent things to her. It's more like she's been brainwashed by all this violence against women. She's been like, we have to assume she's seen I Spit on Your Grave.
Yeah, I was just gonna mention that. Right.
um and so that's like in her mind when she's going and talking to this man who she thinks is genuinely dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a really interesting level
It
to
would
it.
have been interesting if she, yeah, castrates him in the bathtub.
Yeah, yeah. And so, but
Then it really becomes meta.
it's not really that type of movie, but it also
Yeah.
is a movie where the more that she goes into this world, the more unrealistic it becomes. And like the format literally changes.
Right. Yeah.
It's changes, like its aspect ratio changes, its film format. It's all shot digitally, I think, either digitally or on a completely different film stock than the other scenes once she finally finds herself on a movie set. Um, and I mean, it, from that standpoint, it also sort of fits with pseudo meta textual thrillers like Antonioni's Blow Up and Coppola's The Conversation,
Mm.
which are again stories about the, like unsolvable mysteries that are tied to media, and getting obsessed with the minutia of the media
Yeah,
to
and
the point
that
where,
obsession drives you mad.
yeah, you're just driven crazy by it. It doesn't
Yeah.
make any sense anymore. um Unlike Berberian Sound Studio, where just being around this madness sort of drives him mad, I guess is the better way to put that one.
Yeah, yeah, like sometimes your job can just like you absorb the energy of what's around you, and
Right.
then it can have lasting effects. So I think I always like that idea in any sort of psychological horror movie, and this does this really well, and like a tight 85 minutes or something
Yeah,
too.
it's short.
Yeah.
And you said something about you were interested in a sort of more serious version about this. Kind of the last thing I have to say is that there's a movie that might have inspired this,
Hmm.
but it's pretty underseen. It had a little bit of buzz way back when, but it's Alejandro Amenabar's thesis,
That's what I've been meaning to see that for a while now because I that keeps popping up.
and that's about a Madrid college student who's writing a graduate thesis on media violence and discovers a snuff film, and then starts obsessively investigating this
Yeah,
murder, and then she ends up embroiled in all of it.
I need to see this.
And
That,
it's a really good movie, and I haven't seen it in 20 years because I don't know if it's available anywhere. It may be like a foreign
I heard it.
Blu-ray.
That's the thing is like, I could swear that I heard it was coming out at some point, and that's why I keep waiting to see it.
Maybe somebody has the rights to
Somebody
it coming out.
announced it at some point in time, but I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing a release date or anything for it yet. But yeah, no, this sounds totally up my alley.
Yeah, it's a similar idea. It's just less surrealistic and more of a straight line thriller.
Yeah.
But yeah. So if you like this, watch that. Or if you like the idea of this, but you don't like the idea of elevated horror, um, or you don't have any interest in the Video Nasties stuff, seek that movie out for sure. But I think seeing them both is a good idea. Like, I think Censor was maybe my favorite horror movie of 2021. Can't remember what else came out that year.
I don't either, but
Is that did His House come out that year? Because that was a pretty
yeah,
good
that
movie.
was good. Yeah, I think it did.
Nope, 2020, the year before. Okay, so yeah, another trauma elevated horror movie that needs to get away from that being an unpopular signifier because it's a really great movie.
Yeah, I know. People were really getting tired of trauma
Yeah.
as like just the go-to,
I mean, there's a couple ones.
characteristic of a character. Yeah,
Yeah, Saint Maud didn't actually do it for me.
it didn't either. Yeah,
There's the I Am a Pretty Thing in a Pretty
I
House.
like that. I
I
like
like it
everything.
fine.
I like Oz Perkins a lot,
I
actually.
yeah, but I can see it didn't like thrill me.
Yeah,
So I understand what people are saying when they say these things. But
sure.
I think a lot of other movies are getting inadvertently put into those categories and that need to be kind of separated. And I think Censor's one of them.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, I mean, it's it's a part of the story, but it's not the dominant like characteristic or the dominant theme, or just it's just a character, quality that this person has as a result of like what she's been through. I don't know if it's necessarily like about trauma.
Hmm.
I mean, maybe she's been traumatized to some degree by her job, or just the fact that she's censoring everything like you talked about. I'm sure that's a part of her psychological damage, but I don't
Hmm.
think I don't know. It's like not something you can easily define, which is what I like about it too. Like you can't
Yeah.
just say this is the reason why she turned out this way. There's it seems like it could be a number of things.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't think it's a spoiler to say that the crime is not solved in the end.
Right.
Uh,
And sometimes that bothers
just
me, and
just
sometimes
like
it
Blowout,
works. Yeah.
just like Blowout and The Conversation, the crime is not solved in the end. It's not really the point of the story in the end.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, that is our look at meta horror. A couple different kinds of meta horror, a couple not very good movies, but
Yeah,
interesting to
I
talk about
enjoyed
movies.
this regardless. I mean, even if I wasn't crazy about a couple of them, I still value the experience of going through this and seeing, what a filmmaker thinks of their own work.
Yeah,
In a way, it's not something we're privy to all the time. I
yeah,
mean, yes, we have commentary tracks and essays and interviews and things like that, but it's just interesting to see a filmmaker in their actual film
yeah,
deconstructing themselves, which is why I always liked. I mean, I know nobody wants to really talk about Woody Allen anymore, and I get that and I understand, but something like Deconstructing Harry when it first came out, I found that really interesting too, in that regard, where it's just like, let me comment on what I do.
yeah.
And
And I suppose to me, as a someone who's never really been a big Woody Allen fan, I was more interested in what his idea of deconstructing other, like
yeah,
deconstructing
yeah,
Bergman, for
hmm,
instance.
sure,
Like that, the meta joke in, the person who thinks they know what Kurt Vonnegut meant, and then you actually bring Kurt Vonnegut in to say that they don't know what they're talking about.
yeah, yeah,
That's a good joke. That's a good meta
absolutely.
joke.
No, that's yeah. I think Annie Hall has definitely meta elements
Mhm.
to it.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, but it's this was fun. I'm looking forward to making this a yearly tradition where we just find something that we both find interesting,
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
to
for
talk
sure,
about.
for sure. So, where can you be found these days?
At the Chicago Public Library, it's my
Okay,
second home. No,
not where
dir-
you can be assassinated.
oh no, yeah, I probably shouldn't tell everybody the address or anything. I can be found at directorsclubpodcast.com, where I host a monthly podcast where we talk about a filmmaker of some kind. And this, for my birthday week coming up, Bill Ackerman and we're just going to talk about some more favorite movies. That's all.
I wonder
Something
if
sweet and simple.
I wonder if there'll be any overlap with the things he talked about with me.
Yeah, it could happen. You
Yeah,
never know.
because that was basically the idea behind the ones I've done with him, are just basically his favorite movies. I just had to sort of like narrow it down to horror movies and the '70s, and that was the best I got out of it.
Yeah, it's freeform. It's fun. It's just
Okay.
basically like, hey, everybody, if you haven't seen this movie, you should see it if you haven't already.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm like, I try to be on all the socials, but Letterboxd, and I got one of those silly Substack newsletter things that I try to keep up with too, where I'm trying to write reviews of favorite movies and songs, which can be found at 5years, the number 5years.substack.com. Good times.
Cool. As per usual, you can find me on the Genre Grinder Facebook page. There is still a Genre Grinder Twitter, where I just put up the reviews. I don't really go on Twitter very much anymore. But if you want to hear my random thoughts on things, I am on Blue Sky at gabepowers.bsky.social. I was the first Gabe Powers there, so all the other Gabe Powerses have to. Yeah, that's right.
Hey, everybody go to Blue Sky. Let's eventually all get away from Twitter. I don't know if that'll ever happen, but I like Blue Sky.
And I always forget that. Yeah, I have a letterbox under Gabe Powers. I always forget to say that one. I actually have more followers on Letterbox than any other social media platform I've ever done, which makes sense. If anybody who isn't my close personal friend wants to follow me, why wouldn't they not follow me on the movie social media? And then the Genre Writer webpage is still up and running, and May is always for some reason, particularly busy month for review copies. And the people at Severin actually sent me a couple things. I haven't had a Severin review in almost 2 years, so that was kind of cool. And
we
then
just rewatched Crimson Peak. I'm doing Del Toro later.
Oh yeah. We just I should have that review done soon. I watched the 4K. It was interesting and really high definition. You can, in the 4K definition, you can kind of see that it's digitally shot. It always looked more film-like to me, but when you get that far, there's just the slightest hint of that kind of daytime soap, kind of just a little bit.
No, I'm looking forward to revisiting a lot of his films, because some of them I'm not as high up on as a lot of people, like Shape of Water and stuff. Like, there's some titles throughout his filmography I'm like, but I'm excited to talk about his work regardless.
I love Crimson Peak. That one is pretty high for me. It's up there with his Spanish language ones. And I liked the second Hellboy quite a bit. I don't know if I could ever
remember liking that too. Yeah.
The first one's a little corporatized. It doesn't really it doesn't have the same feel to it. But yeah. I like Shape of Water is pretty good. I think I've only seen that one once.
Yeah, it was all right. I think it's just because it won Best Picture and all that. It probably made me go,
It was sweet. It was cool.
It was fine. Yeah.
And good then time. Also, thanks again to everybody who's supporting me over on Patreon. Again, with that money, it's not like a million people, but with that money, I am able to cover the hosting costs for the podcast itself. It's covering that cost, and then the extra cost I'm putting in on Zencaster.com to help me record these things more easily. So I can always use some more to cover the cost of the website itself, but I'm okay doing that out of pocket. That's fine.
Yeah.
So thank you to everybody, and until next time, think up your own until next time, because this is the meta episode, and I can acknowledge that I never think of these things until the last minute, and I always forget to write a joke at the end.
Perfect.
Beautiful, and good night.